Good evening, everybody. It's great to see everybody here. So I'm going to be talking tonight about resilience. And first I'll start by explaining a general framework for resilience that I use in my teaching. And then I will apply some of those issues that we discuss with that framework to my experience in Jordan and all of the resilience that I got to witness there on that trip. So what is resilience? There's lots of definitions out there. I tend to like simple definitions. It's the ability to cope with unexpected changes and challenges and to function well in difficult times. And a lot of research shows that being resilient is critical not just for happiness in life, but also for success in work. And we also know that resilience is something that people can learn, that it's a set of tools and cognitive abilities that we can all learn to use when we face adversity. And that makes it something that's very fun and very interesting to teach. So our need for resilience happens when we experience an adverse event. And so Jody mentioned some of the adverse events that can happen for doctors. And in the business world, we can think about other adverse events. Maybe there's a promotion we were really hoping to get and we didn't get it. Maybe we have a very important client and the relationship had been good and then somehow it soured and now they've taken their business elsewhere. That can be a major adverse event in business. If you're an entrepreneur, an adversity could be, really struggling to get the business up and going, or maybe experiencing a business failure. So there are a lot of different adversities that we all experience from time to time in life. And when we have an adverse event, we have consequences. We might cry, we might get angry, we might get upset, we might get anxious. The consequences are also may affect our actions that we engage in. We're going to do things in response to the adversity. And we tend to think, if you think back to a recent adverse event that you had to deal with, we tend to think, well, this thing happened and then this is how I felt, as if it's a very direct relationship. But there's actually something that's very important that comes in between those two circles there, between the adverse event and the emotional consequences. And that's how we interpret or appraise or think about the event. And that's sort of the crux of resilience, is this issue of appraisal. So what we think of the event. So you and I could have the same thing happen. We have this relationship with this client go pear-shaped, right? And I'm thinking it's catastrophic. It means the end of my career. It means I'm no good at this. And those are the sorts of things I'm thinking. And I'm going to have to get another job. And oh my God, what if I can't get another job? And, so you can imagine my emotional consequences are going to be pretty intense. You're not out celebrating. It's a bad day. But you're also thinking about what you can learn from this experience, how you can move forward, what you might even be able to do to convince the client to come back. And that would suggest that because of my appraisal, my emotional consequences are going to be far worse than yours are going to be because you had a different appraisal. Okay, so does that make sense? So how we think about an event can make a big difference. And I think we can all think of times when we've gone through adversity and we said things to ourselves or we thought things about the adversity that made us feel much worse, and times where we said things to ourselves and we thought things that made ourselves feel much better. So for any given adverse event, there are things we can have going on here that can help us or that can make things worse. So with that appraisal, we can break it down into these three components. Attribution, why did this happen? What does it mean? And what can I do? And so let's start with attribution. So let's say that client has taken her business elsewhere. Now, one of the first things we ask ourselves is, how the heck did this happen? Why? And there's kind of two extremes that we can go through when we're answering that why or how question. One extreme is it's everybody else's fault, and we're pretty good at doing this. It's the client's fault. We had all the right plans, but that guy Timothy on our team, he didn't do what he was supposed to do, and that's why everything went sour. We're very, very good, or I didn't have the resources I was supposed to have to deliver for this client. We're very good at coming up with reasons on the left-hand side of the scale to protect ourselves. But the other thing we could do, the extreme opposite of that, is this happened because I'm a complete idiot and always will be. So a global and permanent attribution. And neither of those attributions are helpful. We don't really have much of a way forward with either of those kinds of attributions. We're not going to learn, we're not going to grow, and we're going to feel either very angry or we're going to feel really awful about ourselves. And sometimes we bounce around. Like a lot of times we might start with it's everybody else's fault, and then a few days later, 3 a.m., we're lying in bed and we think, oh God, it was all me. And so we can sometimes, sort of bounce around. But of course, what we want to do, sooner rather than later, is get to the healthy area here, which is a healthy attribution. And that's identifying areas where you were responsible for what went on, but not in a self-condemning kind of way, in a way that's saying, okay, so what do we need to do? What's the opportunity here? How do we need to grow? And a great way to get yourself into that spot, if you find yourself out on the extremes, is to ask yourself, if I could start all over with this, what would I do differently? And that immediately gets you into thinking, what piece of this do I own? And it's if your team has gone through an adverse event, say with the client, you can say to your team, if we could start with this client again from day one, what would we do differently? And if you do that, it's best then to start with what you think you could have done differently. So you might say, I really wish that I had set expectations more clearly for the client than I actually did. And if you do that, then the next thing someone says is going to be, yeah, and here's this thing that I think that I could have done differently. Now, it's a little bit risky. You could have a sociopath in the team who's going to say, yeah, it really was all your fault. But fortunately, sociopaths are few and far between, and you're unlikely to have one on your team. And so generally what's going to happen is that other people in the team will talk about what they would like to do differently, and then you're having a discussion that helps you identify what do we need to do better next time around. This new client that we're meeting next week, what can we take from this so that we do that better? All right? And so that's what we want for attributions, is to be in that healthy zone. Now, what about meaning? So when an adverse event happens, we have to think, how big or small is this? What does it mean? And there's a couple of things that can affect the meaning that we give to an event. One is whether we see it as a threat or as a challenge. If it's a threat, then we often think of something as a threat when we see the demands of the situation as being greater than the resources we have to give to the situation. And if that's our mental calculation, and it may be a calculation you do instantly, like, I cannot handle this, right? That can happen very quickly, but it also could be something that we think out over a bit of time. Can I handle this? But if we think the demands of the situation are greater than our resources, we're likely to see it as a threatening situation. If we're able to see the demands of the situation as smaller than our resources, then we feel more like we have a challenge. And this doesn't only have an impact on our resilience and our emotional well-being, but research finds that it actually has an impact on our cardiovascular system. And some of this research is done by some of my colleagues at Melbourne Business School, where you hook people up to monitors and things like that, and you're able to see that if they're configuring a stressful situation as a threat, then their blood vessels are constricting, which is not good in the long term for cardiovascular health. When you're construing something as a challenge, your blood vessels relax. So even at the physiological level, this psychological appraisal makes a very big difference. And we'll talk in a little bit about what can we do to try and have that scale balancing so that we're in the challenge area rather than in the threat area. And then another thing that makes a difference in the meanings that we bring to an event is whether we have a fixed or a growth mindset. If you believe that intelligence and abilities is relatively fixed, you kind of have it or you don't, that's a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is when we believe that intelligence and abilities are malleable, and we get better at things by practice, by learning, sometimes by screwing up and then getting feedback and then doing better next time. That's a growth mindset, that things are malleable. And it turns out that the mindset that people have is very predictive of all kinds of outcomes, which I have summarized there in the slides, where, if you think you either have it or you don't, and you meet a setback, so your adverse event is some sort of setback, then you're likely to be very worried that you don't have it. If your belief is that you developed talents and abilities and intelligence and your skills through trial and error and effort and practice and getting feedback, then a setback means something very, very different. It's much less of a blow to identity. And so people tend to persevere and they tend to achieve more. And so if you have a setback and the meaning to you is, oh, this means I don't have it, I don't have what it takes, I shouldn't be here, that's going to have very different consequences for you than if you thought about it with more of a growth mindset. Okay? So that's our meanings. And then the last piece is coping. What can be done? And there are lots of different coping strategies that we can have. And there's kind of two types. So if you think about when you go through an adverse event, you'll be thinking about problem solving and what can I do to fix this problem. But there's also a component of how do I make myself feel as good as possible while I'm going through this really crummy situation. And also if you're leading a team or you're leading your organization, you need to be thinking about that for your staff as well. So emotion-focused coping is like getting social support, being able to talk to someone, exercising, meditation, spirituality, religion, doing something you enjoy, watching something you love on Netflix. You know, all of these are things that you might do to regulate the negative emotions that you might be experiencing from the adverse event. And then there's coping that's focusing specifically on solving a problem. You know, what can I do? And a critical thing there is flexible thinking. If you lock into a view of the situation when the adverse event first hits and that doesn't evolve or change, your ability to cope and come up with good strategies is limited. If you're able to start over time seeing things from different perspectives, then many more options open up for you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. And so that's our model of coping, with us, appraisal being central and attributions and meaning and coping being very important. And now let me apply it to the Jordan Quest. So let me tell you a little bit about the Jordan Quest. So Jordan Quest was run by Equal Playing Field. Equal Playing Field is an organization that was co-founded by Laura Youngson. And Laura, can you just stand up? Yeah. This is Laura. She's amazing. She's a great soccer player. She's an amazing leader, and she also kept me from sliding off a cliff while we were hiking in Jordan. So I really like Laura. Equal Playing Field is an organization that was founded to advocate for equal access to sports for women and girls, and equal pay for professionals in sports. And what they did a year ago, as this was Laura's brainstorm, was, you know, let's do something that would really get us some attention. And they organized a trip to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro to play the highest altitude soccer game ever played. FIFA sanctioned, with the referees, female referees, the regulation goals, everything taken up the mountain. And they played a world record soccer game that's in the Guinness Book of World Records. And I met Laura about 3 weeks before they were heading to Jordan to play the lowest altitude soccer game, which is by the Dead Sea, which is about 300 meters below sea level. And Laura told me about this, and I don't know, we hit it off, and she just said, do you want to come along? And I said, yeah, I'm a recreational player. She goes, that's fine, don't worry. They're all different playing abilities. There was a 55-year-old last time. Don't worry, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. I looked at my calendar. I said, yeah, I'm gonna do this. And so I went along. So let me just show you this video, this very short video, so you can see sort of what the Jordan Quest was like and some of the women who were along with us.
Playing football is not just about the glory.
It's not just about getting your name in the history books.
It's about doing what you love and not being told you can't.
Even though we're told that every day. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself.
Even though we have all stood alone.
It's about sharing one voice.
Though we come from Saudi Arabia,
The UK,
The USA,
Jordan,
Australia, Scotland,
Tunisia. It's about that voice being heard.
it's about opportunity,
Equality.
and respect.
Because together we can do more. Together we are better. we are stronger.
Together, we have no limits.
So you can see, yeah. You can see, absolutely amazing organization. And so, yeah, so we went there and we did all these clinics for little girls, many of whom had never touched a soccer ball before, and they were so resilient. It's hot as all get out. You can see what they need to wear, and it's so hot, and they went out there, just enjoyed every second of it. Absolutely wonderful. So, but it was interesting for me, and it was a bit of a test for my own resilience. When I learned that Laura's depiction of all playing levels was not quite, I mean, maybe technically, but I looked up that 55-year-old. She was on the German national team. Yeah. And then I started looking up more people, and they were all like national team players and professionals and things like that. And I'm a 57-year-old recreational player. I mean, I love it. I play a lot. I'm a competent recreational player. I do okay for a 57-year-old, but nothing like these women. And so then, you know, if I put it in this resilience context, you know, what does it mean? I'm going on this trip to play soccer with a bunch of women who are a million times better than I am. You know, is that a threat or is that a challenge? And it kind of went back and forth in my head a little, and it really came down to the resources and demands. So when I focused on my lack of resources, I'm 57, I'm brittle. You know, never played at the level that these women did. I don't have the skills or the talent that these women have. And I would focus on my lack of resources and then the demands of the situation. They're going to be so good, I'll never even be able to touch the ball. I might even get my leg broken. You know, the demands of the situation were huge. And so with that, the scales tipped. I'm feeling like it's a threatening situation, and I'm walking right into some adversity. But if I looked at it differently, and I did make myself do this, I thought, okay, well, what resources do I have? One is I've coached little girls for about 30 years, and that's a big part of what we're doing. It's not all about what happens in the few exhibition games and in the final game. There's other things that we're doing that are important. I feel really comfortable doing that. I've coached goalkeeping for years and years, and I can help run the goalkeeping station, and so I felt very comfortable with that. And then with the playing, I thought, well, look, I'm not as fast or as strong or as good as them, but I'm pretty fit. And I'm going to take a few more exercise classes at Fitness First before I go to even notch that up a little bit. But, you know, I'll probably be sitting on the bench, and then I'll get a few minutes to play. And during that time, I can, you know, run my head off. And I grew up in Miami in a very hot climate, so that won't be as much of a challenge for me as it might be. So, you know, I thought, okay, well, and then, so my resources are starting to get kind of bigger. And then the demands, I wanted to shrink the demands, and I had to, you know, wrestle with my expectations. Like, I'm not going to go out there and score a goal or, you know, run the show out there, but what's a reasonable expectation? Well, I would really like it if I can make a couple of passes, maybe one of which goes to a teammate, and I make it through the trip without getting my legs broken. That would be, you know, really, I'll be happy with that. And I teach, and my other goal was to have, I wanted to get one little girl diving across the goal as part of the goalkeeping camp. And so, with that, then the scales tipped, right? And I was able to have a challenge meaning to it because the demands are much bigger. The resources now are much bigger than the demands. Okay, and so with coping, I saw so many amazing stories from different women about the coping that they had done. So this is Shabs. She's from Afghanistan, and she's the captain of the Afghani women national team, which does not, as you might imagine, train in Afghanistan. They train in Europe. And she was a child refugee and grew up in Denmark and learned to play soccer there. and then became part of the Afghan women's team. But she hadn't been back to Afghanistan, and shortly before this trip, she went back, and she saw the state of women in Afghanistan and talked to women who basically couldn't leave their homes. And it was just devastating to her to see that. And she was talking to me about that, and I asked her, well, you know, how did you cope with that? What did you do to get yourself through that really difficult situation? And here's what she said, and I'll just let you, I think you all can read that, yeah? I'll let you read that. So, you know, what you see in this is she's going to stay focused, she's going to stay determined. When she talked about climbing herself out, she talked about steps she took. So it's one step at a time to get through the situation that she was in. And then she had this hope for this future, a goal that she had that kept her very motivated. And those are all great coping strategies. And this is Sabs, who is from Tunisia, and she played professionally for a team in Abu Dhabi with a number of women from around the Middle East and some women from the UAE. And suddenly there was a decision made, it was a political decision, that the team should only have women from the UAE. And so all the foreign nationals were basically fired overnight from their team, which meant she lost her visa. She was able to get to Lebanon. She was there for a few months. She was living in her car in Lebanon, made it back home to Tunisia, and then came on the Jordan Quest, and is looking for a team that she can join. And I asked her, how is she coping with that? And she said, I'm strong. I keep myself busy. You have to find a solution. Whatever it takes to do it, do it. Just this keen determination to get to where she wants to be. And then this is Shivani, who is the shortest player on the field, and you see her there scoring a header. And she's very, very excited. And Shivani comes from a small village in India, and she and a teammate were together on the Jordan Quest, and I was talking to them about what it was like to play in their village, and they'd go to practice early in the morning, go to practice in the evening, and they would get harassed by their neighbors. They were supported by their parents, but they'd get harassed by their neighbors on the way to training. And they would call them names and other things like that. And one day a neighbor even came up to her and slapped her for not being enough like a girl. And I said to her, so, how do you deal with that? And short and sweet, she said, whatever they say, we ignore them. And I thought that was just absolutely fantastic, because you could easily let that get you down, let that change who you are and what you do, but they weren't going to let that happen. And then they were part of a world record soccer game. The other thing that I saw in terms of coping was, and social support is so critical for resilience, and I saw a lot of this on the Jordan trip, and Laura, I'm sure you remember this too. You couldn't just stand somewhere alone for more than about 18 seconds before someone was suddenly hanging on you. Sometimes it was Laura, but it was like we literally hung on to each other through the whole week, and the amount of support was amazing. And Laura did something that was really fantastic that I think we can all use in our companies. If you bring different departments together or different areas of your agency together, we sat around the campfire, and Laura had each one of us get up and talk about something we needed from the group and something we had to give to the group. So I said I needed stories of resilience for when I give talks, and I said, what I can help with is, please come talk to me if you're interested in getting an MBA, because I know a really good school where you could get one. But it was a fantastic opportunity. Sabs was able to say, I need a team. And there were people there who had opportunities for her. So it was just a fantastic way to get that social support. And then just the last story in closing, I'll tell you a little bit about some coping that I needed to do. So a key thing with problem solving is flexibility. You need to be able to see multiple different sorts of outcomes for yourself, multiple ones in which you can be happy, not just necessarily one. And so at the exhibition game, I played in the first exhibition game, and I made a few passes, and a couple of them actually got to teammates, so I was pretty happy. And then we played a second exhibition match just on the sand in the desert, and it was pretty casual. One of the women was wearing her pajama bottoms, so I can't be terribly proud of this, but I'm still pretty psyched. I scored a goal in the exhibition game. Yeah. Yeah. So, gotta have a goal from a 57-year-old. It's gotta happen. So, we won 3-2. It was all very exciting, and beIN Sports was there for the whole trip. They're making a documentary about the trip. And so I got to do something that every recreational soccer player just dreams of doing, which is there's a camera on you. There was actually someone commentating. I scored a goal, and I did this run that you do, and I did it right to the camera, and then I got to do the shout-out love to the family. And everybody, you know, lives for the chance to do that, but you never think you're going to, and I got to do that. So with all of that, I was so happy and so excited, and I knew that Laura was faced with a struggle, which is we had about 38 women and only 32 could play in the world record game because we had to follow the FIFA rules, and they're very strict on the number of players. And I knew I had achieved everything and more that I wanted, and I was so happy. And I just said to Laura, you know, I don't need to play. It's okay. I'll help any way you can. And I saw Laura be relieved, probably because she was going to cut me. So 2 hours later, Laura came up to me and she said, hey, would you coach? Would you coach one of the teams, the Black Irises? We had a black team and a white team. I said, yeah, I'll coach. But, you know, the oldest kid I've ever coached was 13 years old. So, you know, I'm not, she goes, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. So that was great. And then, so that was, you know, Laura came to me and told me that. And then Yacht, who was a woman from the UK who was also cut, and she was very, very disappointed. But seeing her resilience, because I went up to her right away, I said, will you co-coach with me? Because I needed to up my resources for this situation, right? I needed a partner. And I said, Yacht, will you co-coach with me? And she was like, yeah. And she went from being sad to wrapping her head around coaching in like 4 minutes. And we spent the next 24 hours planning and strategizing and being so excited about the game. And so it was just absolutely fantastic. And at the start of the game, I gave my growth mindset speech about what we have control over is the effort that we put in. And, you know, when it's hot and we're tired and we're thirsty, we're going to keep going. And other people made speeches, and it was all just really great. We had a great feeling going. And the players went out, and they won 4-2. It was absolutely fantastic and exciting. And that's us celebrating. And through this, and by having the flexibility to not define success by just playing in that game, but taking on another role and getting into that role and enjoying it, I discovered something new for myself in my future, which is it's the first time that I coached grown women and realized I actually really liked it. And this is the goalkeeper of the losing team. She's on the youth national team for Jordan, and I'm there telling her, because she was a bit disappointed, that she's the future of goalkeeping in Jordan, and that I'm sure that she's going to make the #1 spot in the adult team, and I really do think she will. She is absolutely amazing. And just to have the opportunity to talk to someone like her and say something that made her smile was just absolutely wonderful for me. And in closing, this is her, this is the goalkeeper, and this is her phone case that she made with a picture of herself goalkeeping that says, if you believe in it, then fight for it. And I think that's a great theme for us. So thank you very, very much for listening.